Welcome to the Way Out Recovery Hour and a happy Monday to everybody. I am Bob Sharits and I am the program director of the Way Out. Remember that asking for help is the first step, and you can do that by calling us at 296-4444. You can go to our awesome website at thewayoutrocoveryscv.com, and you can join us on Facebook and Instagram at the Way Out Recovery SCV. And we are located on the corner of Plum and Bouquet Canyon. You can just drop on by. We're there from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So, again, remember that if you need help or a loved one needs help, please give us a call, 296-4444. And a happy Monday to everyone. You know, I like to come in here on Mondays and remind everyone that although we can be sitting at the beginning of the week looking at it as a very daunting prospect, that it doesn't have to be. That I'd like to offer you the opportunity right now to take a moment and just stop. Let's just stop everything we're doing. I'm gonna do it too. Although they don't like dead air time. And just take a moment to change your perception. And instead of looking at this big week that you have in front of you with all those things to do, let's look at it as a big, beautiful opportunity to interact with the people around us, those we love and those we haven't maybe met before, and just take the time to enjoy the presence of other people in front of you. And what a great opportunity this week is going to bring to not only help the ones you love, but help everyone that you come in contact with. And what a wonderful opportunity that life gives us to really enjoy and try to serve others and carry the message of gratitude. You know, think about all the things that are in our lives right now to be grateful for. Our show today is, you know, when we talk about substance abuse, substance use disorder, and recovery and treatment, I don't think that it's any secret that the entire family is usually involved. And when, you know, at the Way Out, we provide family treatment as well as individualized treatment because we understand the importance. Something that may be shocking to the listeners to know, you know, we oftentimes have this this view of what an alcoholic or a drug addict looks like. And I get this idea, or a lot of people get this idea, that it is the guy who's homeless with, you know, drinking under the bridge. And I'll tell you that that you may not realize this, but 80% of people who suffer from substance use disorders have jobs and have families, and they're sitting right in the middle of their own homes, and they're suffering and not being able to stop the behavior that's tearing those families apart, that is really putting those jobs in jeopardy, and the impact to families is tremendous. So we provide, you know, we really believe that bringing the entire family into treatment is not only helpful, but it's essential. That a person, if they cannot have their family interact, can still recover. Don't get me wrong, anybody can recover, but it's very helpful. So what we are going to look at today is family systems, how they interact together, what addiction and substance use does to tear a family apart. And I think even more importantly is what happens now that we get into the recovery process, and how can the family be helpful to that process, and how can the individual be helpful to the recovery for the family as well. Because oftentimes when we get into treatment, you know, a lot of people, I've over the years had a lot of people reach out to me and say, oh my God, my family member's in crisis, and we finally do all this work with interventions and finally get them to the doors, or maybe check into a treatment center or an outpatient program, and the family kind of goes, whew, like it's done. And I need to let you know that that's where it begins, that we do all this work to get somebody into treatment, and that is just the beginning of the recovery process. And so it's essential for any loved ones or support to be part of that treatment process. And we are going to look at some of the ways that you can be helpful and that the individual can be helpful to the family. I brought an expert in today who's also our clinical director and a very dear friend of mine. Brenda Way is a marriage family therapist, and she is a clinical director at the Way Out Recovery, SCV, and is an expert in family systems theory and working with families on an individual basis as well as in group setting. Also an expert with training specifically in substance use disorders, which I think is essential to the therapeutic environment. There are a lot of licensed clinicians that don't have specific training in addiction and substance use disorder. And so when somebody comes and has that dual perspective, Brenda is a licensed marriage family therapist, but also a certified addiction treatment counselor. And so brings a unique perspective to working with families in a therapeutic environment in the context of what we do at the Way Out, which is substance use disorders. So I'm glad that everybody tuned in today. If you haven't heard the news and you're tuned in right now to AM 1220, feel free to jump on over to 98.1 FM. It's a big deal for KHTS. They are now AM and FM in an attempt to reach a wider range of people that can tune into the show. So AM and FM on KHTS. So if try it out. If you're at AM 1220, jump on over to 98.1 and see how your FM dial comes in to KHTS. If you are joining us today, you've heard about what we're going to do. We're going to talk all about the experiences that Brenda and I have had, as well as her schooling and her training in working with the incredible, awesome, wonderful families that are in recovery, which we're doing every day over there at the Way Out. So stay tuned. That's what we have lined up for you today. We will be right back after these messages.
Weekends are now exciting in Santa Clarita as Persia Hookah Lounge hosts its House of Entertainment every weekend night from 8 to 11. Thursdays feature a DJ on the hookah patio. Stop by Fridays for performances by Belly Dancer of the Universe winner Jasmina, or Saturdays to hear great local live bands. Persia Lounge also caters for both homes and businesses, starting as low as $8. Discover Persia Hookah Lounge on Main Street, where it's all happening in Old Town Newhall. Persia-lounge.com.
Whether it's getting your degree, brushing up on your skills to get to the next level at work, or taking free college courses while in high school, College of the Canyons wants you to start your finish. COC offers classes in Valencia, Canyon Country, and online. Registration is going on now for the spring semester, which begins February 5th. Whatever your goals, COC can get you there. Visit canyons.edu today.
KHTS. Now FM, 98.1 FM and AM 1220, your hometown station.
We fall so hard, now we gotta get back what we lost.
Welcome back to the Way Out Recovery Hour. I'm Bob Sharits, and if you are just joining us, we are going to talk about families in recovery today. Brenda Way, LMFT, clinical director at the Way Out Recovery, is in studio with me today. Hi, Brenda.
Hi, Bob.
I have a story to tell.
Uh-oh.
No, it's really cool. So Brenda and I have known each other for quite a long time, and we have supported each other through our schooling, through our recovery. Our families are almost really like one family now, you know, because the recovery process has been, we've both embraced it so well. Would you agree with that, Brenda?
Absolutely.
So Brenda is a licensed clinician, a therapist specifically, and knows a lot about family systems and family systems theory and how to work with families. And she and I, over the last almost 12 years, have been working directly with families in one capacity or another. But I think that, I know for me, and maybe for you as well, Brenda, the awareness of working with the family in terms of teaching came after our own personal experience in working with our own families in the recovery process, right?
That is true. That's true. There's no way to know until you've experienced it, I don't think, really.
And so a lot of the education that you and I have and what we're going to be talking about today kind of puts words to the things that I think a lot of listeners have already experienced, you know?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you how I know that is with a really, really cool and big story that I couldn't have written and you couldn't have written, and it has unfolded because both of us are willing to be part of the recovery process. Starting a recovery process is, in my opinion, one of the most scary things that a person could do, right, Brenda?
It's terrifying.
What do you
It's
think?
all unknown.
What are some of the fears that a person might face
When starting the recovery process?
when they've so I got some sort of an intervention, right? Either my family came to me, I hit a wall, I got a DUI, met somebody, my job laid me off, whatever, right? I got some sort of an intervention, and now I'm sitting in a place where I'm faced with the realization that drugs and or alcohol are tearing my life apart. And somebody says, if you go to this place, they're going to help you. And now I'm scared. What am I scared of?
I think what we're generally scared of is the uncertainty of what the future might hold. And when I'm drinking or using drugs to the point where it's killing me, I might not know what the future is holding, but it's easy to medicate myself so that I don't have to face it and feel it. The knowledge of that uncertainty can be really frightening for people.
Yeah, especially, length of time of using makes a bit of a difference.
Huge.
But, think about it. If I've been using for 20 years, it has been part of every aspect of my life.
Yeah.
And now I'm going into something that I know nothing about, right? A treatment center or therapy or whatever. And you're asking me to take away the one thing that has kind of been the glue and held it all together,
Yes.
even though it's tearing me apart, right?
Yeah. And you're asking me to be vulnerable. You're asking me questions that I don't necessarily want to look at the answers.
So it can be very scary. From a family's perspective, I personally had done so much. So it's interesting how I did so much damage in the relationship between me and my family members that they were really, really tired, really, really, I think, angry and sad and disappointed and just years and years of that stuff. My family, I am really fortunate is that my family never gave up on me. However, when I came into the recovery process, my family was not ready to engage in that process with me. Are there reasons? Because that sometimes can become pretty typical, right, Brenda?
Absolutely, yeah. It's the same thing that happens with the person who stops using the drug or the alcohol. It's the uncertainty. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at things that I don't know about, and it's scary to face.
I've gotten feedback from family members when they don't show up, and I'll call and say, hey, we'd love if you joined us in the multifamily groups for your person that's in recovery. And they will say things like, well, they make up excuses, but it's always fear, right? Like, I can't do it. I don't have the time. I don't have this. But what are they really afraid of?
Well, the fear and the shame go hand in hand, and I know at least for parents, well, and for children also, if I have something going on in my family and I don't understand it and I can't stop it, we take on responsibility for the things going on around us, and for that to change, I don't want to look at my part in that.
Right, so I tend to blame myself.
Sure.
Yeah, my mom did that for years. I've been sober a while, but my mom did that for years and years. And she would go to, my mom's funny, we have such a wonderful relationship. She would go to, oh, Bobby, when you were 6, I should have done this differently. I'm like, really, Mom?
Yeah.
We're going back to when I was 6?
Yeah. Well, and
Awesome.
not just parents, but the children also. Yeah. The parentification that can happen with a child if the family member who's supposed to be acting like an adult isn't capable of acting like an adult. The shame that happens with a child because of their inability to stop that problem is equally as terrifying.
Right. And there's a lot of shame that is associated, like you said. We blame ourselves, family members blame themselves. And some of the feedback that I've gotten is like, I'm afraid to come into that environment because you're going to put me on the spot and we're going to talk about all the horrible things that I've done over the years.
Yeah.
And so they're really afraid of that right there. and it can be really daunting. But for whatever reason, my family was not ready to embrace that process when I came into recovery. And so, at that time, I was renting a room from you and your husband, and your mom and dad lived next door, and so I started becoming really close with your mom and dad, and I would sit in those family groups and I would watch all these other families interacting with each other and become very, very sad, right? And I would leave there really with this heaviness of all the damage that I had done to my family, and got really kind of depressed over that. And I would leave there sometimes in tears. And I remember going to over to your mom and dad's house and knocking on their door and saying, will you be my family?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Done. Okay. Yeah.
And what's cool about that is that, of course, they said yes, because they wanted to support me as a friend. And I put that out there because a lot of times people come into recovery and it's not always feasible for the families to come in. But the point of it is to build support. And I was able to watch you guys interact in that family setting and myself practice what a healthy interaction looked like inside of a family system without even being bloodline in that family.
Yeah. Well, and we all got to learn and grow from the experience. My parents benefited from that. I benefit. Everybody who was involved had the opportunity to benefit because we all participated together. And the idea is we're going to be there to support you, but we all learned how to support each other in a healthier way.
Yeah, and so fast forward a little bit after that, you and I are in school and we're learning all these wonderful things about family systems and how they interact with each other, and these big light bulbs are going on.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's the stuff we were doing in group. Right. That's the stuff that we were working on. That's the interaction that was taking place right there.
Yeah.
And so we, through that experience, we understand like directly how this works.
When we're talking about any system, there are individual pieces that make up the whole, and each individual piece is going to have an impact on the rest of that whole. When we're dealing with families in recovery, as opposed to just that one part of the whole, the family might not be blood related. It might not be safe for people who are blood related to be there. It might be more important for the person in recovery to have friends or other people in their lives there. Anyone who's willing to participate to help strengthen the system is welcome and invited.
Yeah, any healthy interaction with and invited new people into the system, building support, we would call that,
Yeah.
and extending that out into the bigger picture. When substance use is inside of a family, what sort of effects can that possibly have on that system? Let's start with looking at one or both of the parents having a substance use. What sort of effect could that have on the children?
Well, I mentioned earlier the concept of parentification. If I am a child and I wake up in the morning and my parent is hungover or whatever, for whatever reason is incapable of taking care of me, my job suddenly is no longer to be a child. My job has become to be an adult for myself. And that's a lot of responsibility that I'm not prepared for at 6 or 7 or younger, or even older for that matter. The shame that comes with not being able to keep things done, the frustration that comes with I just want my parent to be my parent, it has negative health effects, emotional effects, and mental effects. I don't think there's any part of the system that doesn't damage.
What's interesting about that is oftentimes, addiction has many negative ramifications, but oftentimes there are single parent households as a result of addiction taking place.
Yeah.
One or the other either can't physically be there or is not emotionally present or whatever. And so the responsibility oftentimes falls on the other parent to take care of everything. And being able to financially manage and go to work and take care of everything oftentimes will leave the children to sort of take care of themselves. And what's interesting, if there's multiple children, oftentimes it falls on the oldest sibling.
Sure.
But what's interesting about that is sort of typically, or not, but more often than not, is that same oldest person, the oldest sibling, isn't always the one who ends up with the substance use disorder.
Correct. Frequently, they're the ones who excel. There's this desire to prove that they are not their family member. And so the president of the school council and the popular people, and they frequently will go to the alternate extreme just to prove that they are not the same.
Right. They take on this role of sort of being the family hero.
The hero.
You know, I take over and I am. And for those of you who didn't catch it, the term for that is parentification. So if you want to do some research on that and look up that term, parentification, in the realm of substance use disorders, you'll see more on exactly what we're talking about. But what's interesting about that particular scenario is that those kids right there oftentimes end up with other disorders that don't typically look like substance use disorders. Mm-hmm. Or they will end up marrying or hooking up with people who do have substance use disorders. They become this sort of consummate caregiver, right?
Right. We had an instructor when we were in school who used to say 180 degrees of sick is still sick. And that was one of my favorite phrases. I may not become the actual substance abuser if I have a parent who is, but chances are more likely than not that I'm going to return to what I know, and I'm going to naturally gravitate towards someone who's abusing substances. It doesn't have to happen, and it doesn't have to be substances. It can easily be overachieving.
Yes.
Workaholism, overeating, any of the diseases of obsession.
Well, and in addictive disorders, it's not always substances either. I think it's important that people understand there are really two different types of addictions. There are substance addictions, which obviously involve substances, and then there are process addictions, which involve the same thing goes on inside of the brain, but one is created by things like, here's some process addictions: sex,
Gambling.
workaholism, gambling is process addiction. There are some that fall in both categories, which are things like eating disorders, right? Because food and the consumption of food and what's in it can also be the substance that a person is addicted to, but the process of the control of binging and purging and anorexia and all these different things is also in the process addictions category.
Right. Well, and I think since we're talking about family systems, it's important to indicate that we can very easily become addicted to trying to control a relationship.
Yeah,
we become
codependency.
addicted to other people.
Right. Codependency falls in the addictions category, and oftentimes the eldest sibling in a situation like we described earlier falls into that category, where they spend their life taking care of others. And ways that you can identify that is we'll sort of see that in treatment and ask, what do you do for you?
Yeah.
And you get this like blank stare, you get these people that go, like, I've never really even thought about it.
Right.
I know what his favorite is. I know what their favorite is. I know what they like to do, but never myself.
Well, and I think the concept of how am I taking care of myself can be confusing. Well, I'm taking care of myself by making sure that my family member is okay is not the same as I'm taking care of myself by doing this thing for me.
Yeah, by taking care of me. Self-care. Right. Self-care is very, very important for people that are codependent. Even self-care is very important for everybody, but it's even more so. And I think a lot of the treatment process involves teaching people how to do that.
I agree. The hallmark of an addiction is it's stress-induced. Addiction is stress-induced, and that stress permeates the entire family. So having coping skills to help me reduce the stress is more important, I think, than anything else.
I think it's so cool when we, no human being has to give any other human being permission to do anything, right? Like we're all free, we're not attached to each other, although that could be a whole nother huge discussion, right?
Yeah.
But when we work with these families and for the first time they feel like we've given them permission to take care of themselves, what kind of reactions have you seen to that?
Anything from frustration to absolute relief. The family members having permission to take care of themselves, they find a new way to be able to deal with some of their emotions. And they find more relief sometimes than the person who came in for treatment in the first place.
Yeah, many times we see family members recover even though the so-called identified patient, the one with the substance use to begin with, continues to relapse on their substances, and the family members will still thrive, which is really important for us to. So in any sort of a system, when one thing changes, it forces every other thing to change.
It's like if you were to pull on one portion of a baby mobile, the other portions they flip out of balance. Letting go of that one, everything wants to bounce around and return to its balance. So if the entire system can be pulled into a different shape, there's less likelihood for the bouncing around to create the original problem and suck everybody back into their old positions.
Well, what's beautiful about human beings, no matter how far down the scale on any sort of a disorder a person is or a family system is, what's beautiful about human beings and the reason that we are everywhere is because we have this innate ability to survive no matter what.
That's right.
We maintain a balance and a homeostasis, and so you can take and look at how the systems work by looking at a mobile and removing one of the pieces and watch the rest of the pieces find the new balance. Mm-hmm. It always finds the new balance, right? And that's what happens, positive or negative, when somebody in the system changes.
Correct. And that change can look like the entire system developing and growing and healing and everyone feeling better. It might look like a portion of it growing and healing and part of it saying, I'm not doing this, and stepping away.
Right. When we come back after this break, let's talk about some of the typical parent reactions, because we work with teenagers as well. Mm-hmm. When a teen or a kid has a substance use disorder and what that looks like, because those can be some of the most challenging problems to face is when your kid is using drugs. Yeah. This is the Way Out Recovery Hour. I'm Bob Sharits, and we'll be right back.
The best live theater can be found right here in the Santa Clarita Valley. The Canyon Theater Guild has been entertaining audiences for decades with top quality musicals and plays. Located on Main Street in Old Town Newhall, CTG also offers workshops for the young actor in your family. For more information, call the box office at 799-2702 or go online to canyontheater.org.
My favorite restaurant in Santa Clarita? Salt Creek Grill, of course. Great food, neat atmosphere.
For a business lunch or romantic dinner, I'll always go to Salt Creek.
Hi, I'm Greg Amsler, owner of Salt Creek Grill. We have created Salt Creek to provide you with the most comfortable and inviting restaurant in Santa Clarita. Enjoy fresh mesquite grilled fish, aged steaks, and the best chops imaginable. There's entertainment every Friday and Saturday night, and we have the best Sunday brunch in town. Salt Creek is on Town Center Drive in Valencia.
The Santa Clarita Artists Association has a new gallery in downtown Newhall on 6th Street between Main and Railroad, right across from the Canyon Theater Guild. The gallery features our members' paintings, sculptures, and one-of-a-kind handcrafted gift items. Whether you're an art lover, buyer, or an artist wishing to join, visit our website at santaclaritaartist.org, come to our free monthly meetings at Barnes & Noble, or stop by the gallery. For upcoming events and exhibits, check us out at santaclaritaartist.org. We make visual art visible.
Santa Clarita's hometown station.
Now FM 98.1 FM and AM 1220. Your hometown station.
We fall so hard. Now we gotta get back what we lost.
Welcome back to the Way Out Recovery Hour. I'm Bob Sharits, and I am gratefully in studio today with Brenda Way, LMFT. That is a licensed clinician, therapist, and also our clinical director over at the Way Out. If you are just joining us, we are talking about the impact on families that substance use can have, and also what is most helpful for the recovery process for those individuals that are finding themselves new to the treatment centers or to trying to get clean and sober and that sort of thing. So before we went on our break, we were talking really about what happens or what can happen inside of, children who grow up and have one or more parents that are alcoholics or drug addicts or suffer from substance use or mental health issues. And, all we really got into was parentification and the a parent having to take over a kid having to take over the responsibility of one or more parents who can't be there and how devastating that can be. There are also a lot of children that get lost in the middle. We talked about the oldest child. A lot of times, typically, maybe the middle child, you've heard that middle child thing, right, Brenda?
Yeah.
Can become the scapegoat, and I'm glad you said that. There's an interesting thing that also happens in children vying for the attention of one or more parents, where they sort of will, when we're kids, when we're first born, one of the very first things that we learn how to do is make a noise to get fed. Mm-hmm. We make a noise to get fed. We make a noise to get changed. We make, before we even have any verbal skills, we're learning how to give cues so that our caregivers will take care of us.
Right.
If any of that is disrupted, what happens inside of the developmental system is that a child will learn how to do other things to try to get those needs met. So as we grow up, you'll see it a lot in what they call the terrible twos or the terrific twos.
Yeah, terrific.
Tantrums, yelling and screaming, throwing stuff down as an attempt to get what I want, get what I want. Well, what happens is as that developmental process goes, if any of my basic needs are neglected, like food or shelter or nurturing, mm-hmm. I will try everything I can to get the attention, to get what I need, right? And so, if one or more parent is, especially emotionally or physically neglecting a child because of substance use, the children will do whatever they can to get that attention.
Yeah, even negative attention is still attention.
Well, I'll try all kinds of things. I remember being a kid inside of a house where alcoholism was present, and sometimes I would be the look at me joking kind of kid, and sometimes I would be the tantrum kid, mm-hmm. right? And as we get older, we learn to do things that draw the attention back to us, and sometimes the kids will end up competing with each other in a negative way.
Yeah.
And once a habit like that is grabbed a hold of and the brain decides that it works, it can become really, really detrimental to a person. And that's where a lot of bad habits are perpetuated inside of alcoholic or addicted households.
Well, and we're talking about family systems theory, and there are basically four indications, or four labels, that are tended to be given to the children if there is an alcoholic parent. But even if there's not an alcoholic parent, multiple children, they tend to fit into niches. They take on roles. There's the hero that we talked about earlier, the overachiever workaholic who's going to do things right to prove they're not part of the system.
Typically the oldest.
Typically. Frequently, you talked about the middle child syndrome. We mentioned the scapegoat, where there's a tendency to get in trouble. The older sibling's already done all of it, so I need to do something different to prove that I'm not my older sibling. There can be a child who gets completely lost. All the attention's been given to the hero or to the scapegoat, and so this one in the middle just fades into the background, becomes part of the scenery. Frequently, there may be a clown, right. Like you talked about. I'm going to be funny. I'm going to joke around, and all of those people have equal ability to become addicted to a substance or a process because of the pain.
Right. When it becomes pathological is when it turns into things that really do damage. For instance, the lost child may become the isolated, depressive, self-harm.
Yeah.
Real dark.
Right.
Yeah, the clown or the mascot may become the daredevil, the
life of the party.
the life of the party, the risk taker, the look at me, here's how I am, and oftentimes I don't want to certainly label anybody, but I think that we have seen some adults that have ended up with tragic circumstances that may or may not fit in that category, like a Robin Williams, right? I put on this big show out here, and I'm funny, and look at me, and look at me, and look at me, and behind the scenes, nobody knows how very depressed and very sad and very hopeless I feel back here.
Yeah.
There have been several comedians in that that take on that role, and then the scapegoat is the bad guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And don't look, what are you looking at?
Yeah.
What are you looking at guy? And then we've already talked about the overachiever. And those, like you said, are sort of roles that all kids play with if there are multiple siblings in a family. But when it becomes pathological is when there's problems associated with those behaviors.
Yeah.
We also work with teenagers, and I'll tell you, in substance use, so anybody who's wondering, like, how do you get in there and be the most effective to a substance use disorder? And I will, without a doubt, tell you that the earlier you can intervene in the behavior, and the longer you can stick with it, the better chance a person has of not developing lifelong problems because of substance use disorder. A person who uses alcohol or marijuana before the age of 15 is 4 times more likely to develop lifelong substance use problems. So, as opposed to somebody who still uses drugs but doesn't start until after the age of 18, 4 times more likely the younger. So it works the other way around as well. The earlier you can get in and intervene,
Yes.
the better chance of recovery. And a lot of the families that come into our treatment center are, they have a teenager, typically 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, been using substances for a significant amount of time, even if the parent doesn't know.
Mm-hmm.
On average, 18 months is the time that a teenager has been using before a parent is aware of it. Let that sink in for a minute. If you are listening today and you're just identifying that your child may be using marijuana or something that's real popular out there right now with the kids, again, is Xanax. They're taking benzodiazepines. If you are right now getting the idea that your kid is doing it and you know for sure, they probably have been doing it for a year and a half. More than likely, and it's important that we understand that. But also, when we get those families in, they're very frustrated. They don't know what to do. It's been going on for a while, and they've tried multiple different ways to stop the behavior. Right, Brenda?
Absolutely, many ways, and all with failed attempts and more frustration piled on that.
So I'm gonna get in there, and I'm gonna really be the disciplinarian. I'm gonna take everything away. By the way, that's the old that is the old model of recovery or treatment for adolescents used to be sort of a tough love, take everything away, don't let them have everything, make them earn it back, in your face, talk down therapy, all that kind of stuff. And typically over the years, not typically, but what we have found is that those types of methods not only don't work, but they tend to exacerbate or make the problem worse for somebody who is in the world of substance use disorder.
Well, if you think about those 4 terms, if I'm the hero and I'm being criticized, the shame that overwhelms me is going to make me that much more frustrated and that much more likely to continue whatever the behavior is. For the scapegoat, the same. If I'm taking everything away and telling the scapegoat, this is how you're going to live, there's a natural rebellion that's going to happen. And so there's a pulling away.
Yeah. And so it not to say that some of the scared straight model of treatment doesn't work for the population that probably wouldn't end up being drug addicts anyway.
Right.
which is great, because if you just sit back and do nothing, those kids, the great majority of kids who are using drugs that sit on the fence, that could go either way. It pushes them into doing the right thing, because being scared is enough. But for those who have crossed the line into addiction or have that predisposition, by the way, genetics plays about a 50 to 60% role in whether or not a person is going to be addicted to drugs. For that person right there, it only adds to the shame and adds to the stress and exacerbates the problem.
Right.
So they come to us for treatment and they go, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And they're frustrated, and they get in there, and what are some of the typical ways that teen drug use can affect the entire system inside of a family?
Anytime we're talking about an addiction, whether it's substance or process, there's a problem with the boundaries. 100% of the time, there's a problem with boundaries. So I'll tell my child, I expect this of you. This is what I want. And my child doesn't do it. And so I either have to reach to where they are and drag them to where I want them to be with them kicking and screaming, or I'm trying to push them into a place I want them to be. There's a tendency towards overcompensation. I'm going to work too hard to get this person to behave the way that I want them to behave, and it's not going to work, and so the frustration grows.
It sounds like I could lose myself in that process too, right?
Yes, that's exactly what happens. We lose ourselves in the process. Like we talked about addiction to relationships. I become so concerned with what my child is doing. I'm a parent. It's my job to make sure this kid is safe and doing what they're supposed to be doing. I get my identity as a parent wrapped up with what my child's doing, and I forget that those are two separate paths. I want to walk this path for my child and drag him along with me, and I ignore my own.
In learning how to achieve healthy boundaries inside of a family system, how does that work when I have two parents who are sort of on different pages? You know what I mean? Because sometimes one parent can be the you better or else, and the other one can be, oh, honey, it's okay, let's just work. You know what I mean? Can be on very different sides of the house,
Yeah, very
if
much.
you will. And how does teaching a family how to set appropriate boundaries affect that?
Well, it starts exactly there, helping the parents to solidify their unit. Being able to understand the healthy boundary between where a parent is and where a child is. If I can help the parents to be able to communicate more effectively with each other, they don't have to agree, but if they can come to some kind of understanding with each other, one is less likely to drop down a level to where the children are and want to drag them up to where they're supposed to be. I think the most important thing about all boundaries is remembering that I cannot set a boundary for someone else's behavior.
Right.
I don't have that ability to control someone else's behavior. My job, whether I'm a parent or a child or a spouse, is to know what I'm okay with and what I'm not okay with, and to be able to have an honest conversation about what that is.
Yeah. And, some helpful tools in that we give to our parents are things like this. Now that we're here in the recovery process and your kid is struggling, before either one of you makes a decision on things like motivation or discipline or even approach to your kid, teaching them how to separately talk about that before we approach our child, and not to get on the same page, but to be, we still may have differing opinions. But when we come to our kid, we better be very clear about what the expectation is for our kid. Otherwise, what can happen?
100%. And in a situation like that, because we are talking about the entire system, I do not believe it's helpful at all to find fault. I don't believe in assuming blame or designating this is somehow your responsibility. You did this. But frequently when it comes to an adolescent who's abusing substances, part of that stress is the tendency for parents to be in totally separate worlds when it comes to how to raise the children.
Yeah.
There isn't enough dialogue between them, and so the children feel frustration.
Well, oftentimes, so there are a lot of factors that go into substance use disorder, but at the end of the day, it really boils down to a couple of different things. It boils down to genetics and unresolved stressors in a home. The younger that a person is, and exposure to, environmental too, exposure to drugs as well. So here's the formula, right? Is I have a family history of drug addiction. Inside of a situation where there's a nasty divorce, and one or more of the parents or my older siblings is either drinking or using drugs, or I'm exposed to it at school or whatever, and I have that combination going on right there. That's a really, really risky. We see a lot of addiction born out of that right there. When they get to the recovery process, I love doing this. I love being able to steer the family to be able to see, because everyone wants to know, well, like, how did we get here? And I love teaching. Part of it is education. I love teaching families about family history and how that plays a part, about physiology of stress and addiction in the brain and how that plays a part, and also about coping skills for stressors and how that, or lack of them, plays a part, and also negative and positive peer influence and how that plays a part, all in the context, because they want to go, like, it's hard to get this across. The way that you two communicate, or your lack of communication in the middle of this nasty divorce, has played a part in your child being addicted to drugs today. And be able to deliver that 5 or 10 years later without them going, oh my God, we screwed everything up, it's all our fault, right? Because we can very easily blame, or without giving the teenager the, like, sort of ammunition in the beginning to go, see, it's all your fault.
You did this.
Yeah, it's all your fault, right? And so we deliver that in a method that is not blaming and shaming. And so I'm glad that you brought up and said, like, we do that. Pointing the fingers is not helpful.
Correct.
Some other things that are not helpful in the recovery process inside of a family are things like this. Should I point out to you the stuff that you did last year? Should I bring up that old stuff?
It's a bad idea.
When can that possibly be a not so bad idea, bringing up the past?
I think once the family has been able to reach some level of stability, any level of stability, where the dialogue has become more open, once there's that understanding that we're in this together and we're going to figure this out together, there's room for those conversations to start happening, because there's less likely that it's going to be attached to blame and shame.
And so in the family groups, over at the Way Out, one of the things that you and I will oftentimes remind the family of at the very beginning is that if you're sitting in this room, no matter who you came here with, you are here to do the work on your own personal recovery.
Yes.
And we offer them that so that they can start, and you have to repeat that over and over, because a lot of, we've been in this so long that what it looks like is this is the problem. It's your drinking, and if you would stop drinking, everything would be fine. And what we find out is that a person comes in and they go, okay, I haven't been drinking in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Now what's the problem?
Right.
And that's where a person must be looking at their own individual way of improving and growing inside of that system.
Well, you talked at the beginning quite a bit about the fear. What might they be afraid of? And I think by helping the entire family to have a better understanding about what's going on, it alleviates some of that fear. Doesn't take it away, but it gives them coping skills to be able to deal with it.
And isn't it neat when you give each individual member of a family some control and empowerment, right?
Everything gets better.
Yeah. Oh, I have the ability to be okay whether or not my family members do the work.
Right.
Isn't that cool? Isn't that freeing? Isn't that empowering? And that's where we teach all the self-care and the coping skills and all the different stuff to each individual family member. And when you can take, because when families come in, you know as well as I do, everybody wants to blame something.
Sure. And fix that. If I can just fix that, then everything's going to get better.
And what we find out is that if we all individually do the work, that we can be okay.
Yeah.
And back to family or any system theory, what happens when one person takes control of their own recovery and does everything that they possibly can? How does that shift everything?
Everything shifts into a new place. We talked about codependency, and we don't talk enough about interdependency. The difference in codependency is I need you to act a certain way so that I can feel okay, and I'm never going to feel okay because you're never going to act exactly the way I want you to, so there's an ongoing problem. With interdependency, I have learned to take responsibility for my life and what I'm doing, and I'm allowing you to take responsibility for your life and what you're doing. It might not feel good, but I'm going to have a healthy boundary that allows me to be okay no matter what, and everything tends to improve. Even the portions that don't improve, I learn to be okay because I'm putting the work into myself.
Yeah. You know, we got to wrap it up here in the next 2 minutes or so, and I want to put a couple of phone numbers out there for people that are listening that you can, for family members specifically that are listening. But before we do that, I want to say something that I picked up from a very dear friend of ours who has been instrumental in saving both you and I's lives, and I can't say enough about the wonderful lifetime worth of work that both Linda and Jack Brown. Jack is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and Linda has been involved in family systems and helping in that process. And Jack one time said to me, he said, the quality of your life does not have to be dependent upon anything or anyone else. And I looked at him sideways. How the heck do you do that, Jack? And over a number of years, he's taught you and I how to do that.
Yeah.
And we get to pass that on to the families that we work with. So if you are a family member or have a loved one who is struggling and suffering, I implore you to do the work, because the quality of your life does not have to be dependent upon anyone or anything else. There are some other resources, so call us at the way out, 296-4444. We will sit down and help you in any way that we possibly can. Al-Anon family groups, you can look them up on the web, alanon.org, AFG. Their central office in Los Angeles is 818-760-7122. That's Al-Anon Family Groups. That is for the families of those who suffer from alcoholism. Nar-Anon Family Groups for the family members of those who suffer from drug addiction. 800-477-6291. And a very wonderful resource for those of you who have younger adults or adolescents, a place locally called A Light of Hope. You can look it up online. Please call them at A Light of Hope at 661-513-4325. They are doing wonderful things over there at the Savia building on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the evening. Brenda, I love you.
I love you, Bob. Thanks for having me here.
Keep doing the stuff you do.